Hello everyone! Today I am continuing my journey with the processors I managed to buy at auction. A link to the unboxing and cleaning part is in the upper right corner. I am still struggling with straightening the pins and getting some motherboards to work, but I'm ready for the first batch of tests. So that's what I'm gonna do today. To begin with, I will reject what I do not intend to tackle for now. I have neither the appropriate equipment nor the desire to test those mobile processors. Of course, that doesn't mean I'm getting rid of them. They will just sit in my collection until a suitable laptop comes along. That will likely be a story in itself. I won't be testing those two fabulous Xeons either. I have a suitable motherboard for them, but it has its issues, and I will address them in another video. This means that socket 775 is the first position on the menu. Generally, from the perspective of a retro computer collector, they are inexpensive and plentiful. But don't be fooled, as I'm old enough to remember where 486 processors were treated similarly. Besides, CPUs don't occupy much space, making them a fantastic collector's item regardless of their value. Conveniently, 775s do not have pins that bend, so I can put them to the test right away. For that task I choose this Gigabyte motherboard. It's a very successful and feature-rich model, but today I'm most interested in the Intel X48 chipset. It is the most mature chipset for this platform, so it should support absolutely any processor that fits into the socket. Time to generate some heat with PC scrap. By the way, I hate those stock cooler latches on 775s. I don't have anything better, so to make swapping CPUs convenient, I will just put the cooler on top of them with a dab of thermal paste. It's reckless, I do not recommend it, but it works pretty well. My general plan is to run some quick tests to rule out faulty processors and only then take a closer look at what I really have. To achieve this, I opened one of my machines and pulled out a SSD with Debian 12 already installed. I decided to mark any processor as functional if it can boot Linux and then withstand a stress test of several minutes. You might say that's not enough, and you probably be right. But remember how many processors I have to test and that they will be powering my silly retro projects, not a manned mission to Mars. In the first terminal, I opened the sensors to control the temperature. In the second one, the BPI top is used to monitor system resources. And finally, in the third one, I start stress NG to stress the processor. Now I just have to do this for all 22 CPUs. And I have the result. Only two CPUs failed the test. The first one is Core 2 Duo E8400. It is extremely unstable and sometimes unable to even complete the boot process. The second is Pentium 4 519K. Its pads are eaten away by I don't know what. I didn't even try to fit it into the socket. So that leaves us with 20 CPUs. It looks like we have 4 different stories here. The 32-bit Pentium 4's codename Prescott from 2004 and 2005. The 64-bit Pentium 4's also codenamed Prescott, younger by less than a year. Pentium D processors codenamed Smithfield almost from the same time. Without going into details, these were two Pentium 4s placed into a single package. And finally, the Core 2 Duos from 2006 and 2007. This was a totally different CPU microarchitecture and without any doubt, much better. Of course, these groups also include budget counterparts, Celerons. The detailed list is in the description. Okay, it's time to fool around a bit, but first I need to change the GPU to something more appropriate for the era. And then throw in a matching operating system. Okay, so right back in 2007, when these CPUs were still at their peak, people start asking one specific question. Will it run? Yeah, upon release, Crysis absolutely dominated the field of graphics and physics, but at the same time, it made many decent gaming rigs obsolete. So, according to systemrequirementslab.com and my test spreadsheet, I have everything to relieve that 2007 gamers experience. I will gonna use the built-in CPU benchmark and reduce the resolution a bit, so I apologize for not so great video quality. Okay, scenario 1. Let's say you have a less than 3 years old 3 GHz Pentium 530. It's still 32-bit, but you also recently bought a state-of-the-art GeForce 8800 GT graphics card. You should be able to handle it, right? Well, it runs, but it doesn't look encouraging. Of course, benchmarking is not gaming. You could turn the resolution down, tweak the settings, maybe overclock a bit. However, I wanted to run it as is and see what happened. Benchmark runs for different settings, and in case of this CPU they average at 14.8 FPS. Your machine is not old nor it was cheap, so quite a disappointing result. Scenario 2. Same system, but now you have a 2-year-old 3 GHz Pentium 630. Now it is 64 bits, so should be much better, right? Okay, I won't prolong. The result is basically the same, 14.88 FPS. How is it possible? Well, we are still using 32-bit OS and 32-bit version of Crysis, so 64-bit architecture does not matter at all. You may ask, why am I not testing a 64-bit versions then? It's simple. 64-bit version of Windows XP was strange beast and almost no one used it at home. 64-bit Windows Vista would make things even worse, and the 64-bit Crysis executable was yet to come. Therefore, in 2007, the only real option was to play on 32-bit system. Scenario 3. You decided to go multi-core and bought yourself a 2.8 GHz Pentium D820. This one launched somewhere between the previous two and was slightly more expensive. But hey, it's two processors in one, so it should be great, right? Well, yes. it is significantly better. While Crysis is not multi-threaded and won't scale up nicely, it could still utilize a second core for some background stuff. Even with slightly slower clock than previous Pentium 4s, it runs at around 24 FPS. That would be on a verge of playability back then. I would say, not great, not terrible. Scenario 4. You decided to game a little bit longer on your old Pentium 3 and bought your newest high-end computer in mid-2006. The motherboard was expensive though, so you skipped the processor and got a pathetic 1.86 GHz. That's even below the minimum requirement, so Crysis is out of the question for you, right? Well, even though your processor is about 1 GHz slower, draws less power, and is cheaper, it demolishes previous processors in this test, achieving a staggering 38 FPS. How it is possible? Well, you just skip the entire Pentium 4 family and jump straight to the Core 2 Duo. Intel has finally woken up from its Pentium 4 netburst microarchitecture nightmare and returned to the P6 one. This means that from a microarchitectural perspective, the Pentium 4 wasn't a successor to the Pentium 3, but the Core 2 Duo was. Yes, it's a bit like a soap opera. Nevertheless, the difference is obvious to see. The CPU clock wars are finally over. In this scenario, your CPU is a Core 2 Duo E6300 and its clock speed no longer matters so much. And it's also multi-core, just like its name suggests. Okay, I think this marks the end of the Socket 775 processors topic in my 200 CPU journey. One more thing left to discuss, their market value. I valued each working processors using eBay, looking for the lowest prices and rounding them down. The full list is in the description, but the price of these 20 processors is a total of 41 euros. In theory, it's good, but in practice, it's even better. I have 20 additional processors in my collection. Time to move on. Initially, I planned to deal with the Socket 478 now. However, I am still struggling with their bent pins, so in the meantime I decided to look into AMD's counteroffer. This means I will focus my attention now on the Socket 462 Athlons, Durons and Semprons. And let's start by discussing the nastiest issue with this platform, the chipped cores. As you can see, the cores of these processors are exposed and tend to crack during cooler installation. Intact core should look like this, a nice piece of silicon with no defects visible to the naked eye. However, unskilled installation of the cooling system causes chipping on the corners or the edges. It gets even worse on ceramic ones, as this kind of package has zero flexibility. This kind of damage may destroy the CPU, but when it happens, not all hope is lost. Important processor structures are located in the lower part of the core. The upper part serves as a foundation. Destruction occurs when a crack reaches the circuit layers or pressure causes the core to separate from the package. This is a good news, as I had a hard time finding an intact core here. Okay, but why is this so prevalent on AMDs? Here on the left you have a Pentium 3 with a similar design. And this is how the typical Pentium 3 cooler looked alike. On the contrary, this is how a typical Athlon cooler looked like. They were difficult to handle and put a lot of pressure on the core underneath them. One misfortune push on the cooling fan and applied leverage easily chipped off the silicon. For my AMD testing, I choose this cute little motherboard. It has jumpers for FSB settings and integrated graphics, and two built-in SATA ports, which were a novelty at the time. It's more of a budget model, but I've had it for a while and haven't had a chance to play with it yet. So today is the day. My test power supply is fairly new and its ATX plugs is a 24 pin only. I cannot disconnect the extra 4 pins and they get blocked by some coil next to the connector. How typical. An old power supply from the same era will be a much better choice. Additionally, the older power supply, despite being rated as 200 watts less, has a slightly stronger 5 volt rail. This is an important detail as socket 462 motherboards typically have their power section hooked to this rail. All later designs used 12 volts, so newer power supplies, even powerful ones, could cause instability if their 5 volt rail is weak. Okay, time to finally put everything together. This time I will have to install cooler normally, not just place it on top. These 4 rubber pads at the corners would prevent proper contact, and this might lead to some disaster as, unlike the Pentium 4s, these CPUs do not have any internal protection against overheating. Asus states in its manual that this motherboard has some thermal protection, but I don't wanna test it. Okay, I will gently place the cooler, hold the clip on one side, and snap it on the other with a screwdriver. The key is not to apply any force on the cooler itself. The screwdriver should fit the clip's notch, otherwise it might slip and damage the motherboard. Okay, let's connect the Debian stress test SSD and power this thing up with a postcard installed. Yep, it shows some activity, so everything went as expected. Okay, the motherboard is posting and setup also looks fine. Let's boot the Linux. However, the Linux boot isn't quite right. After a long dark screen, it complains about inability to mount the root file system. Let's disable the quiet boot and see what is going on. Okay, it's having a hard time communicating with the onboard SATA controller. That makes sense. I don't feel like dealing with this right now, so I will do something brutal. I will just add another SATA controller and see what happens. Okay, problem solved. Time to do some tests. Finally. Okay, I finished. From the total of 33 CPUs, only 7 are totally dead. Not bad. Apart from this 2500 plus Athlon which definitely overheated, I do not know what killed them. It could have been an electrostatic discharge or an already discussed core chipping issue. Doesn't matter, let's focus on working ones. But maybe let me clean them a bit again. Luckily, it happens that I have all 4 generations of Athlons for the socket 462. The first generation available on this socket featured those ceramic Athlons and their budget counterparts, the Durons. Clock for clock they outperformed Pentium 3s in most cases and were a huge success for AMD. This was probably the first time that AMD not only tried to catch up with Intel but also started to become an equal opponent. Next came the Athlon XP codenamed Palomino. Apart from higher speeds, it also introduced the multimedia SSE instruction set and two interesting marketing gimmicks. First one was the name itself. At the time, Windows XP was a hot new thing. While there was no agreement with Microsoft, the name suggested otherwise and probably boosted the sales. Another gimmick was about their model number. Athlon 2000 Plus did not run at expected 2 GHz but rather around 1.66. It sounds sketchy, but it was really a necessity. The competing Pentium 4s were weak performers but had very high clock speeds. In consumers' minds, clock speed was still most important factor, so AMD tailored their model numbers to match Pentium 4 clocks. Next generation was Athlon XP, codenamed Thoroughbred. With some simplification, they were just refined Palominos. They ran cooler, a little bit faster, and were better overclockers. Later models also introduced 166 MHz frontside bus. At this point, AMD also definitely retired the Duron marketing name and switched to Sempron. Last generation was again Athlon 6P but codenamed Thornton and Barton. Especially the latter one was interesting as it doubled the level 2 cache to 512 kilobytes. Along with some of them having the 200 MHz frontside bus, it gave them a significant performance boost. However, at this point Pentium 4s also vastly improved and Intel regained the performance leadership. These last representatives of the AMD K7 microarchitecture were very good overclockers and overall they were well-liked and desirable processors. Okay, time for the financial report. Again, I found the lowest eBay prices and rounded them down. It gave me a whopping 166 euros. Well, that certainly answers the question in the title, but keep in mind that my price estimates are not reliable at all and were just done for fun. I do not intend to sell anything, I just wanted to expand my collection and fool around a bit. I do not want to benchmark those CPUs as there were no surprises to be found. However, I still want to show you something before I finish this episode. I will install the Athlon XP 1700 Plus and some GeForce 4. I had a very similar setup 20 years ago and I want to relive something again. Yes, for me leaving this bunker in the first Far Cry was something that absolutely blew my mind.
Hey, some good news. I'm picking you up much more strongly now. I suggest you search
I
the
know
huts
it looks
for
dated
weapons and
today,
equipment.
but back then it was hard for me to imagine that games could ever look better than this. Size of the map, quality of the water, and exotic foliage everywhere. It looked like a demo stress test of some GPU, but it was a real and quite good game. This tropical island will forever remain in my memories of the
Take
Athlon
care.
XP era.
The mercenaries are trained to work together. If you kill
Okay,
carriers,
I will probably play a
you're going to
little
have to
more,
check it
but
out.
that doesn't change the fact that this is
Cherry
all I had for you
yes,
today.
the Japanese Navy
Thanks
leased
for
one of their
watching
line
and
carriers on this
bye!
island